Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session. Well, I think the theater here holds about 1,200 people, so we're going to wait just a minute for the other 1,145 people to show up. Glad you're here, still with us this afternoon for the last half of the last day of Convergence. Has everyone been having a good time? Yeah? Enjoy Colin Powell's speech this morning. That was inspirational. Good stuff. Hopefully you're here to learn about the Global Address Book. If not, then we'll free up a few seats for other people to come in and learn about it. Global Address Book has gotten a lot of improvements and extensions since AX 2009. Why don't we start off by just finding out who's in the room here. Who's live on 2012? Couple. Who's working on 2012? And who's live on 2009? Okay. So for most people have some familiarity with the Global Address Book, so you're probably aware that it's changed quite a bit in the 2012 release. We have a lot of further improvements that we'll be doing in future releases as well. You'll notice by its very name, the Global Address Book still is limited to tracking people on Earth, and we do plan to extend that to the Intergalactic Address Book in future versions. But we do have those limitations still, so hopefully that'll meet most people's current business needs. Looks like we're all about here, so let's go ahead and just jump in and get started. My name's Tom Patton. I'm a program manager on the AX Dev team in Redmond. And like I said, we're going to be talking all about the Global Address Book in 2012. And to get started, let's talk about the people who use the Global Address Book. And I guess by one measure, anyone who uses AX, by definition, is using the Global Address Book. The Global Address Book is a central storage for things you see like customers, vendors, contact people, and all that, but it's also the repository where we keep internal components of the application, like the legal entity into which you log in. So the minute that you're logging into AX, you are using the Global Address Book. But more importantly, let's talk about some of the areas where some of the things we've heard about that led us to make the changes that we made here in the 2012 version. So first of all, people who are maintaining and using the master data records, so customers, vendors, workers, contact people, all these core master data abstractions that we have in AX, they're interacting with us all the time. So we want it to be quick and easy to get in, add new things, leverage information that has already been input if a party has already been used in another capacity within the organization. And we want to have a single model that's going to facilitate doing business in a flexible way, whether you're doing direct to customer, whether you're doing B2B. We want to have a single model in terms of relating either people or organizations to your sales orders, your purchase orders, and all of the transactions in the system. We want to get in and out. We want to be able to not do a lot of duplicate data entry and basically make it an easy experience for people to create and then find the information they need to contact and transact business with all of these parties in the system. From a system implementation perspective, data management, master data management is a challenge in any organization, especially when you are tying your AX system into other systems that in your enterprise, but also just within AX itself. And the storage models that we've had in the past have a lot of replication in those data. So each new sales order is replicating address information, and that address information might be held down at the line level. You might be copying a particular address information hundreds of times in the course of a single transaction. Adding that up over time leads to data growth, and your size of your database is expanding. And also the data integrity of the data is compromised when we don't have a unified solution to store and manage that data as it changes through real-life events over time. So for the system implementer and the system administrator, we want to provide a model that allows you to model the real-world relationships that we have, which can be complicated, but that also maintains the data integrity of the master data as it changes over time. Finally, we need to secure that. So there's a lot of great capabilities of reusing all this information for many purposes. If somebody's playing the role of a customer and a vendor, or a worker and a vendor, you may want to reuse all that contact information. If somebody's entering a new relationship and wants to find out if that party is doing business with the company already, that's a great capability to have. But it comes at a question of how do you secure that? How do you make sure that if you have different lines of businesses or separate walls of separation between the legal entities that you're operating in, or between the roles of people that are doing activities, whether that's somebody in HR or somebody who's just an employee of the company, how do you properly secure and manage the security and access to all that information? So that's another key thing that we're trying to address from a system administration and system implementer point of view here. So master data, you hear a lot about it. What is it? There's reference data out there. There's the things that don't change very frequently, things like your customer classifications or your vendor groups or your terms of payment and things like this. They rarely change. Your master data, it changes less frequently, but there's a lot of new master data coming into your system all of the time. So it's centered around people. It's centered around organizations. So you've got people working for different organizations that have different relationships to your company. And the relationships can be varied. There's many different ways that all of these businesses and contacts are related. You can have a company with subsidiaries, and you may want to do some reporting that understands that Company A is a subsidiary of Company B and look at that more holistically. You have board members. You might want to know who the board members are of an organization. You want to have a flexible system that allows you to attribute the relations between the parties that you're dealing with and the organizations that you're dealing with so you can track these things. You've got employees. You've got a spouse of an employee. You've got people playing multiple roles, like customers and vendors. So there's somebody who sells me parts to build TVs, and then I sell them TVs to put in their lobby. So there's multiple roles there. You've got customers who are or workers who, in one sense, are logging into the system and doing work and filling out time cards and expense reports and whatnot. But when they get reimbursed in AX, they're treated as vendors. So this is another case where you've got the same party who might be acting in multiple legal entities and acting in different roles in those legal entities when they are receiving reimbursement for expense payments. And then there's the matter of time. So none of these things is static. An employee in one company today might leave the company. A new employee might take his place. People might switch from one company to another. People might leave the organization and return to the organization. So how is it that we can take these kinds of changes and apply them in a way that we always know what the current state of affairs is, but we also always know what happened at the time of a particular transaction or a particular point in time in the history? So how do we data effectively manage all of these relationships and name changes and things like that happen in the real world? So before we get into the meat here, let's just take a look at some context of what components we'll be looking at in the demonstrations today. So you've probably seen the big colored stack of components that comprise the technology and application stack in AX. And you really see that from source document relations to party to the core location and address, this is the contact information and the actual physical addresses, the roles in the system, like customers and vendors, and the parties in the system, the actual legal entities that we do business with, all the way up through all of the functional areas in the application and how those are manifest within the individual transactions. We'll see a smattering of that across there. So that's just to put some context in there. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and do some simple stuff first. We're going to do a number of demonstrations today. So we're going to start off with a simple, how do I quickly enter a party and how do I leverage that data entry in creating a sales order. And then we're going to see when that party is leveraged in multiple different roles within my enterprise, how can I get that 360-degree view? And finally, we'll be talking about security. But our first demonstration is just about party roles, addresses, and their relationship to transactions like sales orders. So the title of the session is Global Address Book. What is the Global Address Book? What is an address book? The Global Address Book is the complete repository of all parties and organizations, whether they're internal or external to your company. So that's what we mean by the Global Address Book. From a conceptual model perspective, every party, and party is the central notion at play here. A party is going to always be acting in a role. A party can be many different things, and this is sort of a simplified conceptual model of what it is. A party can be a person, a party can be an organization. In reality, in AX, an organization can be subtyped down into things like internal organizations, legal entities, teams, and other organizing principles in AX. But the thing that ties this together is a party. A party lives in an address book. Okay, so the Global Address Book is the complete collection of all of these parties and all of their roles, but a particular address book contains a set of those parties. And address books are used to define security boundaries of who can see which of those contact informations and in which legal entity and all that good stuff. So a party can exist in one or more address books. And then the party roles. So parties are global to the system. A party exists one time in Dynamics AX 2012, whether it's used as a customer in company A and a vendor in company B, or whether it's used as a customer in 5 different companies. The roles, the actual customer record, the vendor record, the worker record, the contact person record, those roles that they play within our organization live within one legal entity. So a party plays a role inside of actually what's an internal party, one of our legal entities of our organization. And then the party is the piece that relates to the location. So the party owns the locations. So whether those are contact information like a web address, an email address, a phone number, a website, or whether they're physical addresses, the party can own many addresses. And then the last component here is the transactions. And transactions obviously are related to our roles. So a sales order is related to the customer, but it's also related directly to the addresses of that customer. So that's the basic conceptual model. And with that, let's jump into the product and take a look at how some of this stuff plays out in the system. Okay, so I'll play the role of Kevin today, who's a sales manager, and things are going to get more tricky as we go through the demos. There's going to be a number of different personas playing different roles, so we can have a look at some of the security capabilities. In this case, Kevin is operating in our CEU company, and he's a sales manager. Now, I'll repeat this again when we do the security stuff, but Kevin has purview across all the companies. He's got people reporting to him across all the companies, so he can look at party records anywhere in the system. And we're going to start off by just how does Kevin, as a sales manager, and in this case also as a salesperson, how does he enter in a basic transaction? And what we'll do is first sell something to a person, and I'd like to ask, if I can hear somebody shout out, what company do you think I'm working as when I give this demonstration? See how many people have been to some demos this week. Contoso. What do we sell at Contoso? TVs, electronics, and all that kind of stuff. And that's perfect because Contoso wants to sell TVs to people and keep track of that information. And Contoso wants to sell TVs to organizations as well. So let's start with let's start by building a brand new customer. So I'll go to my customer. my customer list page here and start a new transaction here. And in this case, you'll see here a set of fields. These detail fields are really all about the role that that customer is playing because I'm building a new customer. And this stuff up here is really about the party aspects that we've been talking about. So I'm going to switch this to person. And when we switch it to person, you'll see the kinds of fields on the detail form when we get to that point change. So an organization has a DUNS number. A person has a birthday. So there's difference between those, but they're going to be treated the same way within the system. So let's say I'm going to sell a TV to somebody called Convergence Attendee. And I'm going to fill out some role information with them. They're going to be a retail customer. And I'm going to just put in their address so we can ship this to them. And you'll see that there's a set of address fields here. And these address format fields are going to vary based on the geography that I'm in. So if I were in Ireland, if he were living in Ireland, you're going to see the zip code field disappear. Ireland doesn't use zip codes. We're going to stay in the USA where we have zip codes. When you switch between countries, you're going to blow away all your address information. And then we're going to just enter in the address information. So 98125 is the zip code. We know that this is in Seattle, Washington. So we have the reference data out there defaulting based on the rules for districts, cities, zip codes, and whatnot. And I'm just going to say we're living on 123 Main Street. I'm also going to put in my contact information as 555-1212 and an email address of convergence@attendance.com or something like this. Okay, so this is a quick create. We're on the phone with the customer. We want to get done quickly. This is just asking me for the basic information about the customer form in this form. If I say save and open, I can move directly to the sales order here. And it puts me right on the lines of the sales order, so I can just start pounding in that he wants to buy a new TV. I'm not going to go through this whole process. What I really want to show you here is the redefaulting of this information, and we'll take a more complicated view on this in a second. But basically, I'm going to put that information in once when I define the customer and the party, which I should, by and large, not be aware of that I'm doing. And then when I use it in a transaction, that's going to default there. So let me close that and then get back on the phone. And this time I'm going to take another call as Kevin. I'm going to sell a whole bunch of TVs to a Convergence company. So let's go ahead and create another one this time. And this time we'll leave it at organization. And we'll say the name is Convergence Company. And our customer group this time is going to be a major customer. I'm going to go ahead and fill out some basic information about the customer's relationship with us and how we're going to get paid and deliver goods to them. And again, we'll just fill out some easy address information, 123 Main Street, and say that his email address is same email address. This time when we say save and close, we're on the phone or we're looking at information, we're looking at emails, we're looking at how we're going to be interacting with this customer. So this time I'm going to go to the full-blown customer form rather than go directly into creating a sales order. So I'm going to save and open the customer. And here we'll see what the full-blown customer form looks like. So you can see that I've got my fact boxes over here telling me a little bit of information anytime I open up and look at this customer. And I can go ahead and continue adding additional information. So in this, yeah? Yes, we do. So, yeah, the question is, do we have support for avoiding duplicates? I'll switch gears to be Inga, a purchasing manager in Europe, who's going to realize when she types in the similar name that it's the same, that it's the same. That's a configurable rule. We'll look at that in the configuration. But yes, we can avoid duplicates, and we can also, if a duplicate occurs, which is certainly going to occur, you can merge those into a single party record later. Okay, so I got my basic address here. I'm going to add a few more addresses here. So let's say that these guys have they have their main business address that we already put in, but you'll see that there's a number of address purposes throughout the system. And in this case, we're going to uncheck business. You can have a single address, use many different of these purposes, but we're going to add some delivery addresses here. So let's say a delivery address is going to be, again, in Seattle, and we're going to just call this Dock 1 Street. And we're going to name the address so people know what it's mean is Dock 1. And let's just say this is for large deliveries. Okay, I could continue to fill out more information like the contact information associated with that particular location and other aspects of delivery terms that apply to that location, but I'm just going to kind of go through this a little more quickly and add a second one here. Let's call this Dock 2. Let's call this the default shipping location. We're going to make this also a delivery address, and it's going to be on Dock 2 Street. Okay. So now in the first demo, we went directly from the customer. We said make a sales order. We didn't have to monkey with, what's the address do I choose? So how's it going to know which of these delivery addresses to use when we do transactions here? And this is about the details of this. So you'll see we've got, first of all, a primary address in here. And let me just open this guy up here. And you can see each purpose that we've assigned in here. And over here, you can see which address is going to be used. So if I wanted to say, this large deliveries is not what I want to use as my default address. I want to use the default shipping location. I can change this here. It's going to change my address to Dock 2. And I can say OK. And now when I go to quick create a sales order from this customer, it's going to default the delivery address to that address. So I'm still on the phone or still looking through the materials in order to onboard this customer. And I've put in the customer's address, but it's also important that I say who we deal with. So, we see systems with upwards of, 300-400 addresses on a single party. Well, there's also, dozens of contact people that we work with when we work with these organizations. So let's just go ahead and build some contact informations here. So I can add a contact to this same guy, and I'll say that his name is going to be me, Tom Patton. I'm the contact info. And, I won't belabor the point here. I could put in my own personal address. I can put in my own personal contact information here as well within addresses. But it's also bringing in the addresses that I've already typed in the prior page. I've also brought in my phone number and my email address that are applicable to the party for which I'm a contact for, but I could go ahead and add additional contact information that's specific to this one contact. So let's see here. So we're just taking a quick review here. We've got our convergence company with a couple of different addresses here. We've got our contact information in this fast tab, and we could have many more here, and we could have contact information associated with each contact person that is a contact person for this company. And now we're ready to go ahead and execute an order. So let's say that I'm on the phone with this guy, and he wants me to sell him a whole bunch of TVs. I'm going to come up here and just say, build me a new sales order, and it will be defaulting the delivery address here to Dock 2, the place where I've said to deliver those TVs to. Now this convergence company is actually, let's say they're on site here in Houston, and they want those delivered directly to the convention center so that they can use them in some presentations here. Well, in this case, I can add an address that's going to still be related to that party, but it's going to be used exclusively within the purview of this one sales order. So if I add an address here and click one time and say convergence delivery, and I forget the Houston zip code. I know an Austin zip code. We'll just use that one. Yeah, there we go. 77056. Yep, Houston, Texas, Harris, good enough. Let's say George Bush Convention Center. and say okay. And then I'd fill out my lines and get back to work here and begin this process. And if I come back to my customer's list of address, I still see my 2 docks that I normally ship to. I see my primary business address where I'll be sending invoices and things like this to, but I don't see the convention center address because that was a one-time job. So that's demo 1, basically showing the party roles, the fact that we're building customers both on people and on organizations, how the addresses are related to those parties, and then how they default onto transactions and how they can be overridden for one-time use. So with the address defaulting based on zip code and things like that, with the reuse of the address, what we're really talking about here is a reduced data entry time and less chance for introducing data redundancy or having data entry errors by continually re-entering that information across the system. So number 2 demo, let's see, I think we already covered this one pretty well. Number 2 demo, we're going to focus on relationships and a 360-degree view. So now let's switch roles here and switch countries and head over to Europe, where we have Inga as a purchasing manager. And she's going to create a new vendor. So if I'm Inga and I'm on my vendor list page and create a new vendor, and let's say that the vendor that's calling me up is called Convergence Company, and I'm going to start sourcing some things from them. So if I come in here and type Convergence, and we'll look at the option to actually do the default warning in a bit, but I can see dropping down here that even though I'm in a different legal entity, I'm able to see that company that was entered in a different role. If I look at the roles, I can find out, okay, in the legal entity CEU, the role of customer is being played by the same party. And I would see some general information about their contact information here to verify that indeed that is the same party that I'm entering here. So that indicates that, yep, that's the same party. So I'm going to say yes. And when I come down to my addresses here, we'll see that we're picking up all of these same addresses here. Now, I might want to add another address. Maybe I'm going to have a remit to address to handle remittances here. So as let's say that we're a parts vendor and add a new address here. And we'll just make sure that our remit to address is the same as business address. Actually, let's keep our same primary address and say okay, so now if I save this and head back to Kevin, of course, we're going to see that that remittance address shows up as an address on that party as well. So what we're seeing there, if I return to, let's see, look at this guy. Here we can see within these fact boxes things like, yes, Convergence Company is playing a couple of different roles within the organization, within our company. They're a customer in one company, a vendor in another. They have some relationships. They have contact people. Here you could extend this to have subsidiaries or other kinds of relationships that you might want. And of course, the contact and address information is shared across those two environments. So the second aspect of the 360-degree view that I want to show you is I'm going to play the role of an administrator who's configuring our employees for use in payments from expense reports. So like I mentioned earlier, in order to receive payments from expense, you need to be entered in as a vendor in the system. And this is going to give me a chance to switch into the admin mode. You could certainly do this as an accounts payable persona as well, but I want to take you to the central global address book list page here and do it from here, which is by default exposed to the administrator. So this is sort of Global Address Book Central. This is where all of the party information is stored across everything. You can zoom in on a particular role, like say workers here. You can filter it by the address books that are defined in the system. So I've got a number of address books that are defined. We'll get to that stuff a little bit later. And I can choose one of these guys. And then up here I can see all of the roles that parties can play within this system. And Alan here, let's choose one that doesn't have an address. Alan here currently is only playing the role of a worker in my organization, and I want to add a vendor record for Alex. So Alex is going to become a vendor so that we can pay him. And his vendor group, oops, you know what? I'm in trouble here as admin because I need to be in CEU for this. So let's rewind there for a sec. So filtering down on workers, I'm going to head to Alan, and we're going to make a vendor record for Alan and say that he's in the employee group. And now at this point, I'm going to add an address for him. So we may have it as a policy that if we're going to pay expenses, we have to have an address in here. And here we're going to call the home address. I'll just mark this as other and say he lives in Seattle as well. Everybody likes to live in Seattle. Now, the one thing I'm going to do in this domain is mark this as private. So private, and like I mentioned earlier, we could do this as an HR administrator. We could do this as an accounts payable if we configure the system to allow those security, and we'll look at that in the third demo. But what this means is that unless you're in one of those select roles that's able to look at private addresses, you're not going to see this address. So home address on Alan Brewer is going to get saved, and if I switch back to Kevin's view of the world, which is right here, and I go to the list of workers from his perspective, and we look up Alan. What was his name again? Alan Brewer. Oh, he's not a worker in this company. I chose a bad demonstration here. So I would need to find. Let me just go back here and see about this. No, he is a worker in this company. Folks, I don't know what to say about that, why Alan's not showing up in here. But I'm quite sure if I type Alan in there 3 more times, it won't get any better. So the intent there is that when an address is marked as private, it should make the address private, not the entire record, and I'm not clear what's happening here. So I apologize for that. So let's move on. We'll get to the security part. Hopefully that will flesh itself out. So what we saw here is first the accounts payable clerk, or the administrator in this case, which may have been my downfall there, is able to enter in the address in a single place where that's going to be used for for paying those expenses, but that address will still be maintained as private when other roles are looking at it. And then we also looked at Inga, the purchasing manager, who's entering a new vendor that's already playing a different role in a different company, and we're able to reuse that information again there. So from that, let's go on to security policies, where we are securing both the master data, the visibility into parties across the system, as well as the visibility into the party roles and the transactions. So if there's a couple of different scenarios in terms of security. You might have two lines of business. You might be selling to the government contractors that you don't want to disclose the sales orders that are open to them to your commercial sales group. So in this case, you want to hide the transactions and the master data and the roles between those two groups. Another instance, you may have different legal entities, and you want to keep a security separation between those different legal entities so that, by definition, your role data is already secured by your participation in those legal entities. But if you want to protect the global party information, we can do that as well. And then the third one is the role-based sorts of security. So let's take a look at how this stuff works in security. I'm going to switch to admin again. And within the org administration menu, you'll see all of the global address book parameters and configuration. So this is where you come to manage the master data, look at all of the address defaulting, address formats, name formats. All that information is controlled here in org administration. And what we're going to do is come into the address book parameters and set our security up. This use duplicate check is the check that you want to check if, when this is enabled, any name that is a subset of an existing name will bring up a dialog and say, do you want to reuse this party? If that's not there, then that duplicate check won't happen. So that's that. The security policy options, there are two of them in here. One is secure by legal entity. So this was the scenario that we talked about where I may want to make sure that, I've got a holding company scenario where I don't want one of my subsidiaries to see the contacts of the other subsidiary. That would be secure by legal entity. And then you've got secure by address book, which is more the line of business scenario. They can be used independently. They can be used in conjunction. So let's first look at the secure by legal entity. And to do that, let's return, let's return to the world of Kevin, who's got the global purview of salespeople across everywhere, and then his employee, who I've got as Nancy, who is just working within a particular legal entity. So let's switch back to Kevin. Oops. And create another customer. And we'll just call this one test. Test convergence, and let's call it convergence test. Set his basic information here. And let's just save and close that customer record. And then we'll switch back over to Inga like what we did before. And Inga is in CEE. And I'll create a new vendor. And this time, if I look at CONV and have my drop-down box, I'm going to see convergence company show down, but I'm not going to see convergence test. So because I'm logged into a different company context and I've got secure by legal entity turned on, I'm not going to see the party information that is associated with role information in those other companies. So, it's important to recognize that the party itself is not associated with any legal entity, but because that party is already associated to a role in another legal entity, it's not showing up within this context. So that's sort of step one, where we're securing things by what legal entity they exist in, or what legal entity they're playing roles in. Let's go. Cancel out of this guy. Let's return back to the admin screen and look at our parameters again. And this time we'll turn on the second type of security here, which is secure by address books. Now I've got the retail bits installed in this environment, so you get this indication that that's not enforced at the POS. I frankly don't know exactly what that means. But here, what I'm able to do is then secure my data based on the concepts of teams and the concepts of address books. So this assign teams dialog is going to give me all of the address books that I've created in the system, and it's going to tell me which teams can look into which of those address books. So for example, I set up a couple here. If I look at the government address book, of all of the teams over here on the left that I have configured in the system, I've indicated that only one of those teams has ability to look at either the master data records or the transactions that are associated with that address book. If I look at my sales team, or my commercial customers, I can see that my entire sales team has access to that. So let's take a look really quickly at the definitions of those teams. So if I come into organization here, this is where you set up teams. As I mentioned before, teams are really another party in the system. They're an internal organization. And if I look at the sales team, the one that has access to my commercial address book, I can see that I've got Kevin, Nancy, and Susan all having access to that address book. If I look at my government sales team, I'm sorry, that's not actually the address book, but those are the team members of my all-up sales team. If I look at the team members of my government sales team, I can see that only Nancy Anderson is a member of that team. So with that, I'm going to switch to Nancy. Oops, I think my network restart. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch in as Nancy, and I'm going to create a new customer in the government address book, as well as a sales order associated with that customer. So let's just do that real quick. So let's call this Convergence County, so we know it's a government entity. We're going to set it as a government customers. And then the key thing here is that when we look at the full customer form, we have the address book association here. So this new customer could be associated with many address books. I'm just going to associate it with the one government address book. So a party can be related to many address books, but I'm going to just associate it with just that one. And from here, I'm going to create a new sales order. And I won't do any lines. I'll just create it for Convergence County that we can see here and save this. So we've created a new party role, and a new transaction. Now if I go back to Kevin in CEU, now even though Kevin has purview across all companies, so if I go into his security and say, in what role are you playing sales manager, you'll see that he's playing the role in all companies. Even though I have access to the SUSB company where we created that, when I go to create a new customer, just for example here, oops, that's not Kevin. This is Kevin. When I come to Kevin's page here and do the same test as to whether I have access to that party by typing in Convergence here and bringing this down, I'm going to see Convergence Company and Convergence Test, but I don't see Convergence County because I'm not a member of a team who has access to see that address book. Okay? So finally, as if we don't have enough instances of AX to confuse me already, let's get one more, which is our user who is Susan. Fired up. And she is a salesperson in the same company as Nancy, who is on the government team, but she's not on the government team. So when we looked at this initially, there's Susan, who is on the government team, there's Nancy, who's just on the sales team, but these two are operating in the same legal entity. So let's see what she can see. If I go to sales order, if I go to my sales orders here, and I search by name, well, you can see there's only a few here, and you can see that although we have that sales order in Nancy's view of the new sales order that we built for Convergence County, we don't see it in Susan's view, even though we're logged into the same legal entity. So that's sort of scenario number 2, where we're securing things by global address book and the association of those global address books to teams. And then the final security mechanism that we looked at before is, let's see here, oops, is when I'm able to do this by role. So let's just take a look at where that's configured. Oops. So if I return to my address book parameters, I go to private locations security, and I can see which roles I've enabled to be able to view those private locations. So earlier when we attempted something didn't quite work out right, but when we said that the HR administrator or the AP administrator could go in and create an address that was specific to a party who's playing a vendor role in the company, and that's a private address, this is the place where you go and configure who can look at the addresses that have the private address mark checked there. Okay. So at a high level, what we saw was securing party and related information, so just the party, the master data, as well as the transactions. So the key thing there on the address book security is that once it's secured, it means that you can only look at either party, master data, or transaction data for those parties who are playing a role in an who are stored in an address book that you have access to via your team membership. So we see that from both a system administrator's point of view, and we also saw it from several personas' point of view within the demo. So if we take this kind of and recap where we've been, we're able to implement faster, implement the system faster by getting those addresses and parties in there a single time, and using the reference information to reduce the amount of data that's in there. We have flexibility of tying transactions or roles to both, B2B or B2C scenarios, so they can go to either organizations or to people. The database size and complexity has been reduced by having a model that stores this information once. Certainly the complexity has grown in some areas. The data model is much more complex to facilitate some of these areas, but it also reduces the complexity from a master data management perspective. We've got the 360-degree view capabilities where you can see all of the roles and relationships between these parties across all the legal entities that you're doing business in. We've got a lot of different options for security by those 3 different areas that we talked about, either line of business or team or legal entity, line of business, or role. And we have a set of services to build and interact with those party information so that you can integrate those with other systems and also use those services to provision the data of your system as you do an implementation. So with that, let me mention these, and then we'll have 10 minutes or so for questions and answers and discussions. Please fill out your evals. Only a few chances left to win the prize for filling out evals and whatnot. I would really recommend that you look at some of the materials on virtual convergence around organization model and solution architecture, both for how the party concepts that we've looked at today relate to the internal organizations and the legal entities and how those things combine. There's a lot of good stuff from the other sessions that you can pick up there. And also the solution architecture view for implementing party and doing the initial design of the legal entities and the party structures and all that kind of stuff. And then head out to Information Source. If you're not familiar with this, there's a lot of information on Information Source that can help you. There's video walkthroughs, there's core concept papers on party, and it really boils this down to a pretty succinct set of information, or check out the other resources on the website. So any questions or comments or discussions to bring up? Let's just go ahead and bring them up. If you shout them out, I'll repeat them up here. Yes. So can contacts exist in specific roles relative to the company? So the question is, can you have a contact person that has an association to, yes, the answer is yes. So the affiliation between with the address book is on the role level. So you can have different security for a contact person than with the entity for which he's a contact person. The trick is there that you'll have to have two separate contact person records. Because there's a party there, the contact person is really a role in relation to a particular other role within the system. So if you're a vendor and you're a contact person, there's still a party. So that party can be reused as a contact person for somebody else, but that contact person himself won't be visible. Does that make sense? Now, are you talking about addresses or contact people? Both. You know, I'll have to take a pass on that. I don't think you can do that with addresses, but I can't answer for sure. I meant to put my email address in here, and feel free to come up afterwards. I'll give you a card, and I'll make sure you get your question answered, because that's a great question, but I'm not sure of the answer. Anyone else? Yeah. So the question is, on sales orders, are the addresses copied to the sales orders? And they are not. They're stored centrally. As addresses and names change on the party, they are stored in a date-effective manner so that you have the history of what has been there, and then the individual transactions plug into the version of that existed at the time of the transaction. In fact, even the one-time address that I showed, that's actually stored in association with the party, but it's marked as one time in association with that sales order. So strictly speaking, no address information is stored with the sales order. Yeah? So each company, each business unit. So I think in that case, the business units are the members of that business unit are going to be members of a team, and you would have to use address book security to implement that scenario. Because they're operating in the same legal entity, I would assume. Yep, so you'd want to use the address book security in that case. I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah? No, they won't be able to see any. So any journals, any transactions that are associated with that party are not going to be seen by somebody who's not in the team that can see that party's role. Anyone else?
For data conversion, we find it difficult because there's many reference table in between the master table. So we would like to ask if there's any advice for data conversion.
Yeah, so that's a big topic, the data conversion. Certainly the flexibility of the data model means that there's complexity in the storage, and it's not going to be an option to go directly into the tables with the global address book tables. You'll have to use the services that are provided, and there's a white paper that is on Information Source that describes how to use that service in order to import those data. I'm sorry? This is a recently published white paper. It's not on the customer source as of yet that I'm aware. I'm certain that it's on this Information Source, and you should have access to that, I believe. If you don't, again, come up, get a card from me. I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. Any more questions? Okay, well, I'll be up here for a few more minutes if you want to come down and chat or get a business card or something. Otherwise, thanks a lot. Have a safe trip back home.